I'm your teacher tonight. We're going to be doing 1 Kings chapter 12 through 14, which I titled, Don't Take Bad Advice. We're going to see multiple times where people take advice from people, and it's not good advice. So let's go ahead and start with a word of prayer. Please bow with me. Our Father in heaven, Lord, we thank you for the blessings that you've given us in this life. We're thankful that we're able to be here to worship you tonight and to study more of your word. Pray that you be with me and help me to be able to have taken your word and speak truly as I teach this class, and that it can be uplifting and help people to understand you better, Lord. Pray that you would bless those who can't be here tonight as well, those that are sick and ailing, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so I said we're doing 12 through 14, but we're going to back up a little bit, do some review of chapter 11. Because in chapter 11, we are introduced to Jeroboam, who is going to be one of the main characters that we're going to be studying tonight. So chapter 11, Solomon is still alive. He's king. And then God's going to send Ahijah, the prophet, to go to Jeroboam and tell him that you're going to be the next king. He's going to take his cloak and rip it into 12 different sections, give Jeroboam 10 of them and tell him you're going to be king over 10 tribes, and Solomon's heir is going to be king over the other 2. So that's kind of the story that happens in verse 26 through 40 of chapter 11. And in that section, we're not going to read it. I'm just going to kind of hit some bullet points in there. But we're going to look at who was Jeroboam really quickly just from that section and compare him to another character in the Bible. I think it's going to be pretty obvious who I'm going to be comparing him to, but I'm going to save that till the end. So in verse 28, it says that Jeroboam was a mighty man of valor. It also talks about him working under the king, being a servant there and working. It seems like he was in control of some stuff. Verses 29 through 39 is when Ahijah comes and prophesies that he's going to be the next king rather than the heir of Solomon. Verse 40, you have where he's threatened by the king. Solomon's going to try to kill Jeroboam, so he ends up fleeing down to Egypt. And 38 through 39, we have God promising Jeroboam that if you serve me, if you are a follower of mine, then I'm going to bless you and your children, then they're going to be kings and things like that. So if you haven't guessed who the person I'm comparing his life to, it's David. David was a warrior. He served under Saul. Then Samuel anointed him. Saul sought to kill David. And then, of course, we know that God gave promises to David. Basically, almost exactly the same promises, not quite, but the same promises that he gave to Jeroboam and David are very similar. So it's interesting to see the parallel of their lives before they were king. And then, obviously, we haven't studied yet what's going to happen, but Jeroboam, he's a bad king. David, we know that he was a good king, and I think the main difference between the two is going to be the heart that they have. So over in 1 Samuel, we're told that David had he was a man after God's own heart, and Jeroboam we're going to see is not that type of man. So it's just interesting to see how if David didn't have that heart, his life probably would have turned out kind of how Jeroboam's turned out. And Jeroboam, if he had a heart towards God, we could see he probably could have been more like David, and how David's life turned out. And, they're both going to make mistakes. David makes mistakes, but when he's confronted with them, he's going to turn back to God. And Jeroboam, he's going to make mistakes, and when he's confronted, he's not going to turn back to God. He's going to turn farther away. So yeah, just kind of an interesting comparison there. But let's go ahead and jump in. There's a lot of scripture to be read, so I'm not going to be reading all of it. I'm going to be reading chunks and kind of paraphrasing other pieces. The first section we're going to cover is 1 through 15. This is in chapter 12. So Solomon has now died, and his son Rehoboam is going to be anointed king, and kind of the conversations that are going to be happening there. So we're going to read the first few verses, 1 through... I'm going to read 1 through 8. And Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had gone to Shechem to make him king. So it happened, when Jeroboam the son of Nebat heard it, he was still in Egypt, for he had fled from the presence of King Solomon and had been dwelling in Egypt, that they sent and called for him. Then Jeroboam and the whole assembly of Israel came and spoke to Rehoboam, saying, Your father made your yoke heavy. Now therefore lighten the burdensome service of your father and his heavy yoke which he put on us, and we will serve you. So he said to them, Depart for 3 days and come back to me. And the people departed. Then King Rehoboam consulted the elders who stood before his father Solomon while he still lived, and he said, How do you advise me to answer these people? And they spoke to him, saying, If you would be a servant to these people today, and serve them and answer them, and speak good words to them, then they will be your servants forever. But he rejected the advice which the elders had given him, and consulted the young men who had grown up with him, who stood before him. So, everyone likes less taxes, right? So with the new king coming in, the people go to him and they say, hey, Solomon really taxed us. It was really burdensome, and if you would lighten that load on us, like, we will be servants of yours. So Rehoboam says, give me 3 days, and he's going to seek out some advice. The first group he seeks out advice from is from some of the advisors that his father Solomon had. And the next group is going to be some of his friends. And I think Rehoboam already knew what he wanted to do. And so he goes to the advisors of Solomon, who tell him, hey, lighten the load, and if you do, they're going to be servants of yours. If you serve them now, they're going to be servants of yours, basically. And that's not the advice that I think he wanted to hear. He already knew, I think, what he wanted to do. And so he went to another group. And that group was his buddies, and they told him, no, make the load even heavier. And I call it advice shopping. You might call it confirmation bias. And that's what he's doing there. He's going group to group till he finds someone who will tell him what he wants to hear. And so from this section, I think we can learn two things. The first is don't advice shop. We need to have people in our lives that we can look to that will give us advice, that will speak truth to us. And when they tell us that and it's not what we want to hear, don't reject it and go find someone else who will tell you what you want to hear. The second one is Solomon, even though he had supernatural wisdom from God, it seems from these verses that he had advisors that he looked to as well. And so it doesn't matter how knowledgeable we are on something, how well studied we are, we can always find people to look for to get advice from, especially when we're doing scriptural things. So I think those are two things we might be able to pick up from there. The rest of this section is, let's see. Yeah, I kind of already covered it. It's basically him going and talking to his buddies, and what they tell him is making the load even more. Verse 15 is going to say, so the king did not listen to the people, for the turn of events was from the Lord, that he might fulfill his words which the Lord had spoken to Ahijah the Shilonite, to Jeroboam the son of Nebat. So we're going to see that this is kind of part of God's plan, what's happening here. So Rehoboam didn't seem to inherit the wisdom of Solomon, his father. And we're going to see in the next set of verses how the people are going to respond to that.
Well, I think it's interesting. It sounds like God set him up.
Yeah.
He knew his heart.
Yeah.
He knew what he wanted to hear. So he sent him to somebody that would tell him what he wanted to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like it's kind of a Pharaoh situation where it talks about, like, can't think of the right wording exactly, but like where sometimes says God hardened Pharaoh's heart, and other times Pharaoh, like, did he have free will at that point kind of conversation. I feel like it's kind of similar to that, where God knew this is the heart of the person that he's setting up to be king and how he's going to respond.
He put him in circumstances where he knew what his response was going to be.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, we're going to read this next section. We're going to read 16 through 20 and see how the people respond to Rehoboam's rejection of what they're asking him. Now when all Israel saw that the king did not listen to them, the people answered the king, saying, what share have we in David? We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel. Now see to your own house, O David. So Israel departed to their tents, but Rehoboam reigned over the children of Israel who dwelt in the cities of Judah. Then King Rehoboam sent Adoram, who was in charge of the revenue, but all Israel stoned him with stones, and he died. Therefore King Rehoboam mounted his chariots in haste to flee to Jerusalem. So Israel had been in rebellion against the house of David to this day. Now it came to pass when all Israel heard that Jeroboam had come back, they sent for him and called him to the congregation and made him king over all Israel. There was none who followed the house of David, but the tribe of Judah only. So obviously the people are not happy with the answer Rehoboam gives them. They're going to go into rebellion. You're going to have 10 of the tribes rebel against him. Rehoboam, at first, it seems like doesn't take it super seriously because he sends out his tax collector to those tribes. And that poor guy gets almost immediately murdered, it sounds like. Which is at what point Rehoboam realizes, hey, this is serious. He flees from where he was at. I think he was probably still in Shechem, which is where the last place is mentioned. Flees back down to Jerusalem, which is in Judah's territory. The next set of verses, which we didn't read, 21 through 24, is talking about Rehoboam gathers an army to go try to, put down this rebellion. And God's going to send a prophet to him, and it says to him and to the people to tell them, no, this was part of God's plan, and to go back to your homes. And Rehoboam and the people, it just says, listen to what God said, and they went home. And so this is a pretty major event in Israel's history. And as the Bible tends to do on sometimes when we want to know more, it gives us 2 verses to tell us what happened. But basically at this point, you have 10 tribes that are following Jeroboam, and they're going to be called Israel. You have 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin. Benjamin being a teeny tiny tribe territory-wise, they're just going to be wrapped into Judah's title, and it's going to be called Judah. And so we went from the one kingdom to the divided kingdom time period. The next set of verses is actually going to cover Jeroboam and his reign, basically. But before we do that, we're going to back up and focus on verse 16 and the actual wording that the people say, because I think it plays into kind of the decisions that Jeroboam is going to make. So here in 1 Kings, we're just going to read their little statement, but I provide a little bit on each side. What share have we in David? We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel. Now see to your own house, O David. So that's current events, what's happening. The one that you see up there, 2 Samuel, this was a rebellion that happened under David. And the people, I'm just going to read again what they say here. We have no share in David, nor do we have inheritance in the son of Jesse, every man to his tent, O Israel. So I don't know if they knew they were saying the same thing or it was providence or what, but they're saying almost the exact same thing as this rebellion that happened under David. And that rebellion ended, so 10 of the tribes, or I think even 11 of the tribes separate, and only Judah is now following David. And with those tribes, so very similar circumstances to what's happening now. And it kind of ended when David sent an army after this guy Sheba. He traps him in a town, and then the town's like, hey, we don't want to be part of this. And they cut off his head and throw his head over the wall and surrender. And I bring this up because Jeroboam, his next fear that he's going to bring up and the bad decisions he makes is because he's afraid that people are going to turn back to following the line of David, which is exactly what happened last time they kind of rebelled. So I think you can kind of see part of the things that he's thinking going on. So we're going to read this next section. We're going to read 26 through 31. Then Jeroboam built Shechem in the mountains of Ephraim and dwelt there. Also he went out from there and built Peniel. And Jeroboam said in his heart, now the kingdom may return to the house of David. If these people go up to offer sacrifices in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, then the heart of the people will turn back to their Lord, Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they will kill me and go back to Rehoboam, king of Judah. Therefore the king asked advice, made 2 calves of gold, and said to the people, it is too much for you to go to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, O Israel, which brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And he set up one in Bethel and the other in Dan. Now this thing became a sin for the people who went to worship before the one as far as Dan. And he made shrines on the high places and made priests from every class of people who were not of the sons of Levi. The following verses talk about him setting up feasts and things like this. It's just kind of showing he's basically replacing the old religion, or the religion they're supposed to be following, with new priests, new places of worship, new feasts and everything. He's just kind of trying to replace everything. As I mentioned, Jeroboam has this fear that the people are going to turn back to the house of David. And I think, like I said, he had reason because it's happened before. He's worried about it again. And we're going to see him make some mistakes. But the biggest mistake, I think, is he's not trusting in God. Because God has already come and prophesied to him. And he heard the prophecy and then saw the fulfillment of him becoming king. But also in that prophecy, God told him, follow me and I'm going to bless you and your children, things like that. And so obviously here he's not trusting that God's going to fulfill that part. He's worried that the people are going to turn back and kill him. As I mentioned, people getting terrible advice. It says that he got advice on what to do, and that advice apparently was to make golden calves and set up this new religion. So we see him do that. Throughout the book of Kings and Chronicles, you're going to see it say the sin of Jeroboam. And this is that sin of Jeroboam, is he is not making a new idol for them to follow along with God and follow these other idols. They're already doing that. We see that under Solomon. They're already doing that, but he's actually trying to replace God with these golden calves and this new religion. His wording in, verse 28, I think. Where was it? Yeah, verse 28, he says, "It is too much for you to go to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, O Israel, which brought you up out of the land of Egypt." Which is almost word for word what Aaron said when he made golden calves when they're in Mount Sinai. So he's not trying to build new idols. He's replacing God. He's saying, the 10 plagues that happened in Egypt, the crossing the Red Sea, Mount Sinai, you guys conquering the land, that was these golden idols, these calves, golden calves. They're the ones that brought you out. They're the ones who performed all those things. So that's going to be the sin of Jeroboam that you're going to see repeated when it talks about, they tore down the shrines, but they were still doing the sins of Jeroboam. So one thing, as we talked about, Jeroboam, he's worried the people, because they have to go to Jerusalem to worship God, to follow different commandments of the Old Testament. They had to go to Jerusalem a few different times a year, if I remember correctly. And so Jeroboam's worried that by doing that, they're going to want to turn back. So he is going to kind of try to fix that by changing their religion. And one thing he's going to change is he's going to make their religion about convenience over obedience. He tells them, do not go all the way down to Jerusalem. That's too hard for you. The easy thing is go to these places that are closer to you. He sets one up at Dan, which is the top of the nation, and then Bethel, which is at the bottom of the nation. So it's so much easier for you to go to these places than go all the way to Jerusalem. So we need to just be careful of that in our own lives, that our job is to be obedient to God, not make our religion about convenience. Yeah, definitely. Making the religion about us rather than about God. Yeah. Let's see. So the next set of verses is going to be chapter 13. We're going to read verse 1 through 3. This is going to be how God's going to react, because he's not going to be happy, with the people replacing him. So here's God's answer to the people, or to Jeroboam, really. Verse 1 through 3. "And behold, a man of God went from Judah to Bethel by the word of the Lord, and Jeroboam stood by the altar to burn incense. And then he cried out against the altar by the word of the Lord and said, O altar, altar, thus says the Lord, behold, a child, Josiah by name, shall be born to the house of David, and on you he will sacrifice the priests of the high places who burn incense on you, and men's bones will be burned on you. And he gave a sign the same day, saying, This is a sign which the Lord has spoken. Surely the altar shall be split apart, and the ashes on it shall be poured out. So we're introduced to a new character. He's going to be called the Man of God. He's not given a name throughout this story. And one thing that's interesting is he's called up from Judah rather than God using someone local or even from the same country, because now they're two different countries. God's going to call up someone from Judah. We're going to find out later that there's another priest who literally lives in Bethel, but God's not going to use him. I think further in the story we're going to see why. But it's just kind of interesting to note that God called someone out from somewhere else to come up from a farther distance. So the man of God's going to come up to the man of God. The man of God's going to come up to Jeroboam and make this prophecy about this child named Josiah that's going to be from the house of David. And I just think it's interesting because as we've spoken, Jeroboam, his fear is that the people are going to turn back to the house of David. And now God's prophesying that someone from the house of David is going to come and destroy this altar, and destroy and the priests and burn their bones on the altar, things like that. So that's going to happen under King Josiah, 300 years in the future. That is over in 2 Kings 23, 15 through 16 is what we'll read. Moreover, the altar that was at Bethel and the high place which Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who made Israel sin, had made, both that altar and the high place he broke down, and he burned the high place and crushed it to powder and burned the wooden image. As Josiah turned, he saw the tombs that were there on the mountain, and he sent and took the bones out of the tombs and burnt them on the altar and defiled it according to the word of the Lord, which the man of God proclaimed, who proclaimed these words. So 300 years is, a long time to wait for a prophecy to come true. Like, you're not going to be around, And so I'm sure after, 2-3 years goes by and nothing's happened, you're going to start wondering, was that really a man of God or is that just a crazy person coming up talking to me, right? So it says that the man of God is going to give a sign that you're going to see today happen so that you know the thing that I said is going to happen in the future is going to happen. And that's going to be the altar splitting in two, ashes pouring on the ground, the ones that are on the altar. So Jeroboam, we're going to see his response, and we're going to see that happen in the next section. We're going to read just 4 through 6 here. So it came to pass, when King Jeroboam heard the saying of the man of God who cried out against the altar at Bethel, that he stretched out his hand from the altar, saying, Arrest him. Then his hand, which he had stretched outward, withered, so that it could not be pulled back to him. The altar also was split apart, and the ashes poured out from the altar, according to the signs which the man of God had given by the word of the Lord. Then the king answered and said to the man of God, Please entreat the favor of the Lord your God, and pray for me, that my hand may be restored. So the man of God entreated the Lord, and the king's hand was restored to him, and became as before. So Jeroboam doesn't like what he's hearing, obviously. He stretched out his hand, and it withers. I don't know what that looks like, but it says it withers, and he couldn't pull it back. The altar that he's making sacrifices on splits in two. All the ashes pour on the ground, just like the man said. And now Jeroboam is standing there looking ridiculous. And we don't see him start praying to his golden calf that he set up and asking that to try to heal him, right? He turns to the man of God and says, Please pray to your God and ask him if he will heal me. I think in doing that, he's acknowledging that his gods don't have the power that this man of God, Yahweh God has. Now, God could have left his arm withered. I think it would be fully justifiable for him to do that. It would have been a daily reminder to Jeroboam of what's going to happen, and that this condemnation that he's brought upon himself. But God heals him, And I think God healing Jeroboam's arm is part of God showing that he has mercy and will show grace to people, because Jeroboam's done something wrong. He's trying, and God punished him right away for it. But then when Jeroboam has any sort of repentant heart, maybe in any way, acknowledgement even that God is more powerful, God shows him mercy and heals him, right? So I think this is a point where Jeroboam could have used that as an example that, hey, I've done wrong things, but God will still forgive me if I turn back. And I don't know if that's why God did it or not, but you would hope that that would have been something for Jeremiah to dwell on. He's not. Yeah.
He obviously was pointing to him to say arrest him, so there had to be other people there.
Yeah.
So not only did they get to see the power of the affliction,
Yeah.
but then immediately the power of healing.
Yeah.
And to your point, the good and the mercy part of it, or the justice and the mercy part of it happening all at the same time.
Yeah, definitely.
Would be a daily reminder, at least for that group of people to go, I remember a very odd situation happening.
Yeah. And you'd hope that there would be some people, obviously the nation's not going to turn back, but you would hope that at least a few people that were there maybe would think on it.
Well, I think that all goes back to the point that you started with his heart. Jeroboam's heart was not directed to God.
Yeah.
And we're going to see Jeroboam, his hand's not going to return to being withered, but
Yeah.
he remains separated from God.
Yeah. Yeah, he does. He's just going to make more mistakes. So, so the next section that I didn't read but is in here is Jeroboam is going to offer reward to this man of God, invite him back to give him food and water and a meal together. The man of God is going to say no in verse 9. Very pointedly, he says no. Yep. Verse 9. Well, I'll read verse 8 too. But the man of God said to the king, if you were to give me half your house, I would not go with you, nor would I eat bread nor drink water in this place. For so it was commanded me by the word of the Lord, saying, you shall not eat bread nor drink water, nor return by the way you came. So he went another way and did not return the way he had come. So he's rejected the king's offer to come back. I'm not sure why God commanded him not to eat and drink. It doesn't ever say. I didn't see the border of Judah to Bethel, like how far that was, but from Jerusalem, which is, inland a few miles, or in the border a few miles, it's only a 10-mile journey between Jerusalem and Bethel, which round trip would be like 20 miles, and he was riding a donkey, as it will say in a little bit. So I'm not sure why God didn't want him eating and drinking, but maybe he wanted him fasting, maybe something else, maybe it was some sort of test of the man of God to obey him, I don't know. But we're going to see that not work out so well for him in this next section. All right, so we're going to read verse 16, 17, 18. This new section is going to introduce a new character. So we have the man of God who's unnamed. Now we're going to have this man called the old prophet, who's also unnamed. And this is the prophet I was talking about. I don't know. He lives in Bethel, and God does not use him. And I think we're going to see why by his actions that come up here. Let's go ahead and read verse 16 through 18. So context to bring you to this point. Sorry. So the man of God's traveling back home. The old prophet hears what happened, and he goes to go get the man of God. So he just approached the man of God and asked him, hey, why don't you come home with me and eat with me? And then the man of God says in verse 16, and he said, I cannot return with you, nor go in with you. Neither can I eat bread nor drink water with you in this place. For I have been told by the word of the Lord, you shall not eat bread nor drink water there, nor return by going the way you came. He said to him, I too am a prophet, as you are. And an angel spoke to me by the word of the Lord, saying, bring him back with you to your house, that he may eat bread and drink water. He was lying to him. So this is twice now that the man of God has been asked to stay, and twice now that he has rejected that offer to stay. First by a king, and now by a prophet, which I think are probably two people you'd hold in high regard. But he has obeyed so far the word of the Lord, said no, until this old prophet lies to him. Why he lies to him, I don't know, but he chooses to lie to him and tell him, an angel told me to bring you back. And so we're going to see the man of God listen to this man and return.
The only reason we know that he was a prophet is because he proclaimed himself a prophet. We don't see that he was endorsed by God in any of the context. And the result that we're going to have, obviously, he wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, in verse 11, it says an old prophet dwelt in Bethel. So I read that as assuming that he was a prophet at some point. Do you think that might not mean that?
I suspect he claimed he was a prophet.
Okay. Yeah, maybe. I haven't thought of it that way. I just assumed that he was a prophet at one point, and now God's no longer using him, probably because he's turned away and doing things like he's doing now. But I don't know. In the New Testament, we're told, I just pulled these two things out. Galatians 1, chapter 8. But even if we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel to you than what we have preached to you, let him be accursed. And in 1 John chapter 4, verse 1, Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits, whether they are of God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. So we're warned in the New Testament to, when someone comes to you and says they're from God, that we need to be checking that against the word that God has given us, right? And that's kind of what's happening here. Is he had been told something directly from God, and now he has a man coming saying, hey, God told me this, through an angel, I guess. An angel told me this. And he's going to listen to that man rather than the direct word of God.
Well, I suspect that prophet could have actually talked to God and gotten an answer. I mean, we don't see he made any attempt whatsoever to find out if
Oh, yeah. Like he could have asked God, should I? Yeah.
was true.
Yeah. You mean when the old prophet came, he could have then asked God, which one do you want me to do? Yeah. I think he very well could have. Yeah.
Which is the point of those two scriptures.
Yeah.
That would be testing the spirit.
Yeah.
God, is that what you want me to do?
Exactly. Yeah. We're going to see he doesn't test the spirit, check it against what God said, because he's going to go back, verse 19 through 22. So he went back with him and ate bread in his house and drank water. Now it happened as they sat at the table that the word of the Lord came to the prophet who had brought him back. And he cried out to the man of God who came from Judah, saying, Thus says the Lord, because you have disobeyed the word of the Lord, and have not kept the commandments which the Lord your God commanded you, but you have come back, ate bread, and drank water in a place of which the Lord said to you, Eat no bread and drink no water. Your corpse shall not come to the tomb of your fathers. This would be a really awkward meal. I can't imagine, after that, what the man of God would have said. I'm sure there was some angry words spoken. So God's going to now use this old prophet and actually speak to him and use him to condemn this man of God for his actions. So further on the story,
Seems to me the message that we should all get out of this is, if God says something, pay attention to it.
yeah,
Don't think maybe I can do something different because that's what pleases me, that's what I want to do.
yeah,
That results in condemnation, just like it did to the prophet here.
yeah, and it brought condemnation to the man of God. So we're going to see that happen here now in verse 24 through 26. We're going to read. When he was gone, a lion met him on the road and killed him, And his corpse was thrown on the road, and a donkey stood by it. The lion also stood by the corpse. And there men passed by and saw the corpse thrown on the road, and the lion standing by the corpse. Then they went and told it to the city where the old prophet dwelt. So God's going to send this lion. We're going to know pretty much that God sent the lion because the lion's going to kill him and then not eat him, not eat the donkey. The lion's just going to stand there by the corpse, and the donkey's just going to stand by the corpse, which is not how nature works, right? These passerbyers see it. They think, hey, this is weird. So they tell the town where the old prophet is. He finds out, and he thinks this has to be the man of God. And so he goes down. He collects the body. He brings the body back and buries it, the body in his own tomb, and then tells his children, when I die, bury me in that tomb as well. It's not on the scripture I actually read, but it's in this section. I think it's interesting that he doesn't seem to have a super remorseful heart. I don't know, it might be just me reading into it, but at one point, it is on here, sorry. In 26, he's like, this is the man of God who is disobedient to the word of the Lord. And is like, he does not this is the guy that I tricked. It's just he did it all by himself almost. But yeah, so this chapter ends with verse 33 and 34, and you'd be hoping that this verse would say that Jeroboam, after these events, Jeroboam turned towards the Lord or repented, but it does not. 33, after these events, Jeroboam did not turn from his evil ways, but again he made priests from every class of people for the high places. Whoever wished, he consecrated them, and he became one of the priests of the high places. And this thing was the sin of the house of Jeroboam, so as to exterminate and destroy it from the face of the earth. Jeroboam has been confronted multiple times in his life with a prophet coming to him saying, this is what's going to happen, and then Jeroboam sees it happen. He sees, his hand wither and then be healed by God, and yet his heart is not right. He still will not turn to God, but he turns away from him. And it made me think of the story in the New Testament with the rich man Lazarus, where the rich man, begs, raise someone from the dead, have them talk to my brother, surely then they will believe. And Jesus says, if they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded though one rise from the dead. And I think that's just a heart issue that Jeroboam, his heart is not right. And so even when confronted with these things that you think, man, that's got to turn you to believing in God and following God, he just does not do it. Next chapter is chapter 14. In case it wasn't confusing enough with Jeroboam and Rehoboam, and then having the old prophet and the man of God prophet, we're going to bring back Ahijah the prophet. He's from chapter 11. And then we're going to introduce Abijah, who is going to be the son of Jeroboam. And because of timing, I'm not going to be able to read. Double-clicked it. I'm not really going to be able to read this section. I just put up some kind of bullet points of things from it. But basically what's going to happen is Abijah, the son of Jeroboam, he's going to get sick. So Jeroboam, I'm sure he prayed to his gods to try to heal his son, to do anything, but nothing's working. His son is sick. And so finally he's going to turn and say, hey, we need to go check with Ahijah, the prophet, and see what's going to happen with my son. But he thinks, well, if I go, I'm going to get this negative thing because, I don't follow God. And so Ahijah's going to know me. He's not going to protect my kid. He's going to condemn me. So he tells his wife, hey, we're going to dress you up in a disguise, and I'm going to send you down in my place to go talk to him. So they're going to try to trick this prophet of God, which in a sense is trying to trick God, which obviously is not going to work. Ahijah is old at this point. It says that he's old and he can't see anymore because of his age, which I think is an interesting contrast between Ahijah, so old that he can't see, so I'm assuming he's pretty old, compared to the last chapter where he's called the old prophet, and God's not using the old prophet, but he's still using Ahijah the prophet here, even though he's old. So it's not that the guy's old, it's that his morals probably aren't right with God, and that's why he's not being used. I guess what I'm trying to say is even if you're old, God can still use you, even if you can't see.
I'm thankful for that.
You're not that old. You can still see. Let's see. So as I was saying, Ahijah's sick. They're going to send to go check on him. They're going to try to trick him. But as soon as the wife's Ahijah hears the wife's feet approaching, he's already been told by God that she's coming. He doesn't even have her get close. He speaks out and he says, "Come in, wife of Jeroboam. Like, why are you dressed as someone else? I know who you are. Didn't you know that I was sent to you?" And he just jumps straight into this prophecy that is from God, that none of it's good. It's just all condemnation, basically, on what's been going on. So a few different things that are in here. Basically, I've been kind of comparing, Jeroboam and his heart to David. Here we're going to see God do that in verse 8. He's talking, and he says, "You have not been as my servant David, who kept my commandments and who followed me with all of his heart to do only what was right in my eyes." Verse 9, "But you have done more evil than all who are before you." So God is just going to condemn Jeroboam and his whole family. He's going to mention in verse 11 up there that the people who are going to die in the streets, they're going to be eaten by dogs, and those who die in the fields, they're going to be eaten by birds. So there aren't going to be pleasant deaths, and then even after they die, people aren't even going to care about them enough to give them proper burials. There is going to be one person in the house that is going to see death and be mourned for, and that is the son, I never get his name right, Abijah, something like that. But the son is going to die, and I think Ahijah the prophet is going to use his death as a sign. Again, a sign that's going to happen now, so you know what's going to happen in the future will happen. Because he tells Jeroboam's wife that when you enter into your household, that's when the son is going to die. The people are going to mourn for him, and he's going to be buried. And then that's what happens. It's going to say, that she leaves and she gets home, and as soon as she crossed the threshold, her son died. And then he was buried, and the people mourned for him. Why God saved him, I don't know what was going on. Verse 13 gives us a little something. "And all Israel shall mourn for him," that's the son, "and bury him, for he is the only one of Jeroboam who shall come to the grave, because in him there is found something good towards the Lord God of Israel in the house of Jeroboam." So I don't know what it was about this child, but somewhere in his heart he had it right with God, or he was maybe like an infant. I don't know, but God's going to save him. Even though he's dying, he's going to save him and give him mercy, basically, I think, this child. The last part of the prophecy that they're going to give is talking about the people, like the nation's going to be carried away and scattered, and that's going to be talking about, I think, the Syrian captivity, which is like 200 some years in the future, that they're all going to be all carried away in captivity. So it's going to end chapter 9 or verse 19 and 20. It's just going to basically say that he reigned 22 years, and then he died, and his son's going to take over reigning. The rest of the chapter is going to flip over and stop focus on Jeroboam and focus on Rehoboam, and kind of hit some of the highlights. I would say more the lowlights of his reign, but it's going to cover verses 21 through 24. Basically says that he reigned for 17 years in Jerusalem. The nation of Judah provoked the Lord to jealousy, and they did worse than all of their fathers before them. And they set up idols on every high hill and every green tree. Verse 24, "And they were also perverted persons in land that did according to all the abominations of the nations, which the Lord had cast out before the children of Israel." So the land of Canaan was full of bad people, and God was like, their sin is full. It's time for them to be removed. And he replaced them with the Israelites, and now the Israelites are doing the same things they were doing. They're just as bad as those people. Then the last section, 25 through 30, says that in the 5th year of Rehoboam's reign, that Shishak the king of Egypt came up against Jerusalem, and he took away the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures out of the king's house, and took away everything. If you remember, during Solomon's reign, obviously they were very wealthy. It says that in Jerusalem, it says the king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones. So when Jeroboam inherited the throne, it was one big nation, and now it's been divided in two. They are, I don't know if they're poor necessarily, but it seems like they're poor, especially compared to what they were, right? It talks about Solomon had made these golden shields, and those are taken, and now they're using bronze shields, and it seems like there's not even that many of them because they have to carry them from one place to the next and lock them up and things like that. So I think you just see as the people turn from God, God removes his protection from Israel and from Judah, and we see his blessings come away from them, and the nation's going to start decaying worse and worse. It also adds that Jeroboam and Rehoboam were at war all of their days. So it was not a peaceful time period in this land either. And then he finally dies, and his son is going to take his place, Abijam, another name that sounds just like everyone else's name. So that'll be next week. So thank you very much.